Welcome into the Hard Count. It is the People's College Football Show. Glad to have you with us on this 4th of July Eve, Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024. Last one on the face of the planet. Really great conversation dialed in for y'all today. We got the man who is running that SEC podcast, the man who is one of the hardest working individuals in this whole space that I have been privileged to interact with, and that is SEC Mike. You may know him as Michael Bratton. Does great work. I already mentioned the podcast. He's consistently putting out great content on his socials. We talk everything SEC, from Mike's Vols to his take on Ole Miss that I think you're going to want to hear. We talk Alabama. We talk Auburn. Pretty much cover the entire SEC. Really good conversation that I'm excited for y'all to hear. Juice that we finally got him on the program. So without further delay, here is our conversation with SEC Mike. We got SEC Mike joining the Hard Count, baby, from that SEC podcast. 1, go make sure that you subscribe to that podcast feed. 2, subscribe to their YouTube channel. Him and Cousin Shane producing bangers, just routinely bringing you the juice when it comes to all things college football, specifically in the Southeastern Conference. Mike, it's been a long time coming, man. How are we doing?
Hey, doing great, JD. And first of all, I just want to say thanks for having me. I know I've said this on my show. You've come on several times. We very much appreciate that, all the time you've given us. But I just want your listeners to know that as outstanding of an analyst as you are, you're an even better guy. You're one of the nicest people in all of media that I've ever encountered. So it's an honor to do your show. Anytime you want me, I'm here.
Man, well, that's an extremely, extremely kind way to intro us into this show. So I gotta live up to that now, Mike. So I appreciate you, man. Hey, let's start here. In or out on a couple of these SEC teams? We were talking before we got off the air, a better probably qualifier for the in or out when it comes to these teams, like the over-under win total. So essentially, are we buying or selling these teams? Auburn, their over-under win total is at 7.5. I'm pretty high on the Tigers, but I want to know what you think about them, Mike.
Well, in case you are unaware, I'm like public enemy number 1 on the Plains right now, just because I'm not a huge Hugh Freeze guy. I never have been. But, that's a tough one. That's near a push for me. But if I assume I have to pick one. So I'm going to go under, just because, and I've made this well aware down there at Alabama Jocks Radio. They've had me on there. And I basically just said, I don't believe in the way that Hugh Freeze is building his program. And they're over the moon. They can't understand what in the world is this guy talking about. We're top 10 in recruiting. Well, that's fantastic, because the teams you're chasing are top 5. And if you struggle again this year, like you did last year, all these guys that you're signing, guess who's going to be calling them? Kirby Smart's going to be calling them. Kalen DeBoer's going to be calling them. Josh Heupel's going to be calling them. And I don't think you're going to hold on to all these guys. So if you hit the over, if you continue to recruit, I get it. We'll build something special. But that was the model 4 or 5 years ago, JD. I think you have to go portal. I'm just dumbfounded that they didn't add a quarterback via the transfer portal. And again, I feel like the hopes and dreams of Hugh Freeze's program is on Peyton Thorne's shoulders, and that's not a good place to be, in my opinion.
And I totally understand that too, because I think for me, until we went out and got to see Auburn in person during spring practice and kind of get to talk to some people over there, like I'm also very much so like I need to see it to believe it from Peyton Thorne. The reason why I lean over on this is because I think Hugh Freeze calling the offense here, and there's a lot of ifs and buts and variables here, so Tiger fans buckle up. If the weapons translate that are supposed to translate, Keandre Lambert-Smith from Penn State, Cam Coleman, super freak, true freshman, and Peyton Thorne just takes a positive year 2 jump. And it would have to be a jump now. It would have to be some solid production, have to throw for more than 100 yards in the big games. Like those are all obvious. If they can help him enough, I think that the talent level on this roster is good enough to beat some of the teams they'll have to beat to get the over. So we're splitting right away, Mike. You're going under on the Tigers. I'm going over. The good news, though, on that is one of us will walk away from this thing right. So that's good news. That's the good news. One of us will be able to be on the right side of things. How about Florida? Florida, they're over under, Mike. 4.5. 4.5 preseason. Not even saying that they're not even 5 wins for the Gators out there in Gainesville. Your overall thoughts on Billy Napier entering into year 3 and his chances of hitting that over there?
Yeah, I love Florida this year. Now, again, they're not going to win the SEC. They're probably not going to make the playoff. I'm not saying that. But, I mean, I think they could legitimately double that over-under. I mean, I think 7 is more realistic, 7-5, but 8-4 I think is on the table. I think what everybody does with Florida is they look at the schedule, and yes, it is daunting, but they just write them off because of it. And really where it's most daunting is the final 7 games. And we do this every year, JD. We get suckered in by, oh man, they got to play Ole Miss and Texas and LSU and Florida State and on and on and on. Well, yeah, those teams were great last year. There's no guarantees that they're going to be great this year either. So we could get to the season, we could get to those games, and all of a sudden those games are not as formidable. But why I really like Florida is the first 5-6 games. I think they can win all of them. And if you do that, you've already hit that over. They own Tennessee. I don't care where that game's played. I'm a Tennessee grad, and I'm sitting here telling you they could play that thing in Neyland Stadium 100 times in a row. Florida's probably going to win about 97 of them. So that game, again, I even tend to favor Florida in that, as crazy as that is. But Miami, A&M, year 1 coaching staff, Central Florida, get the heck out of here with that. I mean, they're going to kill Central Florida. So, yeah, I love Florida and the over. This is probably the one I'm most confident about.
I was about to ask you that. So of all the win totals in the SEC, and we're not going to go through every single win total, this is the one where you're like, hey, let's get out that piggy bank. Let's go get the kids' college fund, and let's put it on Gators over 4.5.
I think so because it's so low. Now, the one other one I love is Missouri. They're over under. It opened, I think, at 9.5. I think it's down to 9. But I love Missouri too. But that's a little bit of a higher bar, obviously. And there's no way we could project injuries, of course. But a key player here or there goes down for Missouri. Maybe you don't hit that. Whereas Florida at 4, that's ridiculous. I mean, we are getting to a bowl game in Gainesville, and I think Billy Napier, even though he may be on the hottest seat in the country right now, he's back for another year.
No, I'm with you, Mike. I'm 100% with you. Like right here, we're in lockstep. Like I'm going to wherever I can cash this in at, and I'm giving them hey, Gator Chomp, let's get it done. Let's put everything we can on the Gators over 4.5. And a big thing too, which Mike, I don't know if you're feeling this way as well. Graham Mertz had his name dragged through the mud last year. Like everybody was dunking on him after the spring game and saying he wasn't any good and all the picks he threw at Wisconsin. And I'm like, okay, well, we did all that talking that was negative about him, and then he went out and threw 20 touchdowns, 3 picks, almost 3,000 yards. And then he gets more weapons this year. You get a better defense. Like, I'm with you. Like, I'm not saying they're winning 10 ball games and get the tickets to Atlanta and think about a college football playoff berth, but 4.5? Mike, 4.5 feels foolish to me. We're in lockstep here, brother. We're in lockstep. Ole Miss. I think it's probably fair for us here to maybe – because I don't know that the win total is so – intriguing to me as their postseason aspirations. I think it's college football playoff or bust for them. In fact, I think they maybe need to win a game in the college football playoff to satisfy the folks in Oxford. Where are you if I were to say Ole Miss makes the college football playoff and then wins a game in the CFP? Are you buying that, in on that, and out on that?
I mean, I'll go a step further, JD. I think Ole Miss can win the national championship. I legitimately do. Now, I'm not sitting here saying they're the favorites to do it, but outside of Georgia, maybe Ohio State, I would probably put Ole Miss right there, number 3 with anybody in the country. I really do believe that. And I love the philosophy. Again, this is why I kind of bash Hugh Freeze for his model. I love what Lane Kiffin's doing. And it's not just adding via the portal. It's getting guys to buy in. They're all bought in there. Last dance. We're all coming back. Several of these players could be in the NFL right now, but they obviously added people via the transfer portal, with arguably the top transfer portal class in the country. And it's not just positions that they were lacking. They're adding talent, JD, at positions where I'm sitting here saying, what? You got great receivers. Why are you adding Juice Wells? Well, because Juice Wells this time last year I thought was the best receiver in the SEC. I mean, they're adding strength on strength, and I love that philosophy because if someone's afraid of it, well, there's the door. Because Lane Kiffin will just replace you with another transfer. And is that sustainable? I don't know. But this is the method because they don't recruit as well as Georgia. They don't recruit as well as Alabama. But where they can make up is this insane system we have right now and exploit it for all you can. And credit the fans and the boosters down there for giving Lane Kiffin the ammunition and really even Lane Kiffin for flirting with the Auburn job to get them to pony up, so to speak. I mean, it's a storm of good things, I think, for Ole Miss, and that's why I think they legitimately can win the national championship this year.
Hey, Ole Miss fans, if you're watching right now, go follow SEC Mike on Twitter and I mean, boost this clip because, I mean, that is, I think, the rallying cry. They're probably all in on is like, hey, this is the year. Lane Kiffin, I don't know if he plays poker, but he took all the chips and said, hey, we're in. All right, let's ride. Let's get after this here. This is our window. We got Jackson Darty back. We got Trey Harris, Juice Wells, you just mentioned, the guys they got on defense. Like, I am really, really intrigued by what they end up being. I think given that proposition of them winning a game in the college football playoff, right now I would say I'm in on that. National championship, the odds in Vegas right now, they have the sixth best odds to win the whole darn thing. So, I mean, it's not the wildest take in the world, I think, for the folks that are saying, Ole Miss to the Natty. Are you kidding me? I don't think it's that crazy. I'm with SEC Mike on this one. Mike, the interesting thing to me here, if Ole Miss does do what we say they could do, which is compete for a national title, I think a lot of folks, a lot of coaches probably, would shift their mindset more towards what you're saying of, hey, you have to lean on the portal, not just in a surgical sense, like you got to go in the portal and get some quantity. I wonder how people view the portal with Ole Miss having like big-time success in 2024 in this new playoff. I think they could shatter the glass ceiling for a lot of folks in some ways.
Yeah, no doubt. But I honestly, I think it's more interesting if it blows up. And then we're sitting here saying, well, what in the world? We'll never do that again, right? So, I mean, I've been hearing for years, JD, that this is, you can't do it. You can't, you have to develop and recruit linemen, and you have to have them in your system 3 or 4 years. Well, Lane Kiffin just turned his back on all that. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but since he's been hired in Oxford, Ole Miss has got the third best conference record of any team outside of Georgia and Alabama, obviously. So clearly what he's doing is working, and I'm just fascinated. I mean, I think he's a step ahead of the game right now, and even he calls it out for being a foolish system and it's broken and all this, but credit him for exploiting it because it's within the rules.
Dude, he's such a great soundbite. Anytime I see something of his on social media, throw the AirPods in, turn up the volume. I'm like, this is, I don't know what he's going to say, but it's probably going to be hilarious and probably have a kernel of truth baked in there because what you just said is so funny. He's like, this system is broken. Let me take advantage of it to the fullest extent. LSU is fascinating. Their over-under win total is at 9.5. Brian Kelly in year 3, historically, has been cooking when he goes into his third year at a school. Cincinnati, he took them to a BCS Bowl. Notre Dame, they went and competed for a national championship against Alabama. Year 3 for LSU, are you in or out on that over-under total preseason of 9.5 wins for the Tigers?
I think I'm out here, JD. And now keep in mind, I was the fool that said, I don't know how many people said this, but last offseason, I had LSU winning it all. Now, their offense, I think they lived up to that expectation. The problem was the defense was a complete train wreck, and I was anticipating them taking a step forward, which didn't happen. So where do they go now? I don't understand the LSU hype other than Brian Kelly's he is a great coach. I love the additions and the firings he made, but more important, the additions he made to the defensive coaching staff. But you don't just snap your fingers and all of a sudden we have an outstanding unit. And I keep hearing people say, well, it can't be any worse. Well, they've been saying that down there about the defense in Gainesville for about 4 or 5 years now. It can get worse. So particularly if you can't stop people from running the ball, and I think that's going to be a huge issue at LSU this year. Blake Baker, new defensive coordinator, super aggressive guy. It worked at Missouri. It didn't work at Miami. So there's going to be tons of busts. And they had far and away the best offense in the country last year. It's not going to be near that with what they have to replace. I'm not saying they're going to be awful on offense, but I would say they're probably top 6 or 7 offense in the SEC. But that's a huge step back from the best offense in the country. So, yeah, I have to sell LSU right now.
It's so tricky because I think what you said is on the money. Like, it's this trade-off of, well, if the defense does get better, how much better are they from 105th total defense? And then on the other side of things, offensively, you know, you feel good about Garrett Nussmeier, I think, in Baton Rouge, but you do lose 3 first-round picks. I think the schedule is really interesting when you look at LSU. The game against USC is obviously going to be one you got to have if you're going to get the over on that 9.5 win total. They got Ole Miss. They get Ole Miss and Bama both at home. Going to Gainesville could be tricky, and then they get Oklahoma at home. This is one where if I'm going with my gut, I think LSU is probably a 9-3 team. I think that's probably a pretty fair spot to peg them at. But like if I got a couple dollars left over from throwing a few dollars on the Ole Miss over, on making the college football playoff, and the Auburn, I might sprinkle a few dollars here on LSU over 9.5 wins in 2024.
Man, you love to gamble then, apparently, because I feel it. Again, 10-2 with some of the Ole Miss and Alabama. I get it. They're both at home. I think I would favor both those teams to beat LSU right now. So, and heck, Brian Kelly's not won an opener since he's got there. Now, like you said, he's got to get that one. If not, we've got massive problems, I think.
Dude, the narrative out of week 1 between that game and then the Florida and Miami game, I mean, it's going to be overreaction central when it comes to the week following that game. But nonetheless, good to chop up some in or outs for us here when it comes to the SEC. A little bit ahead of SEC Media Days. Let's talk about a team that is close to your heart. You mentioned them already. You are a graduate of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. How are you feeling about Tennessee overall this year? I mean, win total aside, the Nico era, Josh Heupel has another year in the system, at the school to allow his system to permeate that team. How do you feel vibe-wise around Tennessee heading into 2024?
Oh, off season, it's always sky high, JD. It feels like 98, going to win the SEC, headed to the playoff, and then that Florida game rolls around. It's, oh, God, on to the next year. You know what I mean? Like that's what it is annually for Tennessee people. And I'm not quite there just yet, but I'm massively concerned. Week 2, they play NC State, which went on a tear towards the end of last season. I think that is a tricky game that universally Tennessee alums are just, oh, whatever, we're going to kill them. Well, I think they're going to be preseason top 25. Can't completely overlook that one. And the schedule makers, I don't think did them any favors. First conference games at Oklahoma. And that's going to be Oklahoma's debut SEC game. Josh Heupel's return to Norman. I mean, there's going to be so much fanfare with that football game. Again, it's hard for me to imagine Oklahoma losing that game with the atmosphere that is going to be there. But I'm not saying Tennessee can't beat them, but that's going to be fascinating. I get it. Nico, there's all this hype around him. But I don't know that, JD, that they're really going to count on him to be, Hendon Hooker 2.0, because one thing that gets lost in the Josh Heupel conversation is just how great his teams are at running the football. And with what they have back on the offensive line, I think they're going to be right there again, one of the best in the SEC rushing the football. I think Tennessee's got the best defensive line in the entire SEC. Very talented, very deep unit there. Now, basically the rest of the defense is a huge question mark. But if you can dominate the trenches, that'll make up for a lot of issues you have in the secondary and perhaps at linebacker being a little bit thin. So, Tennessee, they're in a weird place because I think this time last year, JD, almost universally, Josh Heupel was regarded as a top 10 coach in the country.
Yeah.
And now I don't think anyone has him that. And I'm trying to figure out what happened. And I get it. They look bad against Florida. Missouri was awful. They got destroyed by Georgia. But nearly everybody lost to Georgia last year. Missouri won 11 games in a big-time bowl game, Cotton Bowl. So I think this is a big year for him. Is he elite? Is he have the SEC defenses figured out his scheme? I don't think so. But if they don't win 10 games, I think that's going to be a fair question going into 2025 as how elite is Josh Heupel.
The thing that's so interesting to me based on last year was the level of talent on the offensive side of the football, to me, felt drastically different than what they had in 2022. Hendon Hooker probably should have been a Heisman Trophy finalist. Jalen Hyatt won the Biletnikoff. And you roll into this season, and there's a lot of excitement around Joe Milton. There's a lot of excitement, or I guess this last season, Joe Milton and Dante Thornton and what they were going to be, and Squirrel White. And it didn't necessarily translate, I think, the way that a lot of us thought it would. I think Joe Milton not being mobile, as mobile as a Hendon Hooker when it came to extending plays, I think Tennessee really felt that. I think having Brew McCoy go down, they really felt that. Dante Thornton not be healthy and hit the ground running, they really felt that. And so I think as bad a rap as Joe Milton got, and some of it is definitely on him, this offense still scored 30 points a game. And some of that, you look across the different points in the schedule where they're able to run it up a little bit more. I felt like if Josh Heupel can score 30 points a game with Joe Milton at quarterback, what can he do with Nico? And I think what you said is on the money, too, to start their season. If they get 4-0 Those first four, specifically NC State and at Oklahoma. How confident is Nico? How high is the vibe in that locker room? How high is the confidence across the team? And I think if they can get to 4-0, that to me, not just from a mathematical standpoint, but from a trajectory standpoint, I'd feel really excited and really optimistic about hitting that 10-win mark.
Right. And if you look at Josh Heupel's numbers last year, it was the worst offense he's put on a field, and they won 9 games.
Yep.
I mean, if that's the worst, and you're winning 9 games in this conference, I think that says you're one heck of a coach. And I believe their scoring in the SEC was like 45 points per game in conference play, and then it jumped down to about 28. Joe Milton, for all the negativity, I believe he threw for around 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and maybe like 5 picks. Again, these are bad numbers. It just tells you how ridiculous offensive production Heupel and company are used to putting up. And if they can get even close to that, Tennessee is going to make the college football playoff. But I can't. I mean, they're right on that line. Will they make it? I'm not confident enough to say they will, but I certainly think they're going to be in the mix all season long.
And it's funny because with Nico, like, the unknown is undefeated. Like, we think we know what he's going to be. We know what he was as a recruit. Was the number 1 player in the class of 23 for us here at On 3. And Charles Power, if he says someone's a big-time player, like, I trust Charles Power implicitly. But when it comes to this upcoming season, like, I hope there is a little bit of patience with him as he gets his feet wet being a starting quarterback in college football. It's one of the reasons why I was glad that he didn't play last year, quite honestly, because I think there is such a thing as playing too early. When it comes to what he brings to the table, you mentioned the run game. I think what he does with his legs, and we saw it in the bowl game against Iowa, the designed quarterback run game I think looks different. Him ad-libbing when he breaks contain and scrambling for 8 yards on 2nd and 7, I think that looks different, and as another element to the offense that they didn't really have last year. Even extending plays. I mean, you cover Squirrel White for 2 to 3 seconds, good for you. You cover him for 4 or 5. I don't know if I believe you if you're telling me you're going to do that consistently. So that's fascinating. Mike, when we talk about like what success looks like for Tennessee in 2024, is it college football playoff? Is it 10 wins? If they win 10 but don't make the CFP, do we feel some type of way? What is like the line of demarcation in your mind where you're like, if this happens, Tennessee fans, we can live with it for the better part of the offseason?
I think it's going to be this way for about half the conference, which is, I think these coaches are going to be upset with their fans, but it's playoff or bust. Yeah. And I think that's for half the conference. And obviously we know half the conference is not going to make the college football play. It'd be good for my business if they did, but realistically 4, 5, maybe 6. And I think 6 is really stretching it. 5 may even be stretching it, but I think that is the expectation across the SEC. Heck, I said half. It may be even more. I mean, it may be about 10 teams expect to get there, and a lot of fans are going to get disappointed annually unless we go to 14, 16, 18.
And who's to say we're not going to that here in the near future? I see the NCAA tournament talking about expanding the March Madness. I'm like, are we sure we want to do that? Okay, I get it. It'll make money. You do what you want to do, but I wonder that's a whole other show in itself, Mike. We could definitely we could go down a rabbit hole on the playoff structure. But I'm with you. I think when you open up the field to 12 teams and how good the SEC is and how good I think a lot of these rosters are, like, yeah, okay, we are one of the top 12 teams in America, or we expect to be, and if we're not, we got some problems. Let's pivot here to the great state of Texas. I think by the time this airs, I believe that Texas will be in the SEC. I'm not sure when this is airing exactly, but I think they'll be in the SEC. We know they're going to be in the SEC this year. A&M and Texas, that rivalry is back. You have been very vocal, and you've been on the Paul Feinbaum show, so people, if his face looks familiar because he's on national TV, you said, hey, I think A&M is going to be superior to Texas in 2024. Am I off base there? Do we still feel that way? And if we do feel that way, why are we taking that stance on A&M this year versus Texas?
Well, like you said, I said it on national television. I can't go back on it now, but that's where I'm at. I sometimes like to say things that are some would call it outlandish, I guess you'd say, but I just look at things a little bit differently, I guess. But I mean, I still feel that way. And again, I think A&M is going to be much better than people anticipate. We got rid of Jimbo. thank goodness we got us a qualified adult down there to run A&M's football program, and Mike Elko. I think that's a huge addition by subtraction. I don't care what we had to pay Jimbo. He was worth 2 or 3 buyouts to get him away from this football program. So that's a big reason. And, Colin Klein hiring him as offensive coordinator, and the fact that he played at Kansas State, was very successful at Kansas State, yet he left there to come to A&M. I think that should give you an indication of his belief in what they can build down there. And they're talking championships now down there, not trying to win 9, 10 games. They're talking championships. Now, are they going to be playoff bound year one? I wouldn't go quite that far, but really, I think the fact that game, Texas at Texas A&M, it's in College Station, I think that'll be the difference. I'm not sitting here saying Texas is going to be awful or anything, but I think people just get enamored. But I don't get it with Texas. I think it's because of Sarkisian. I think it's because of Ewers. And again, they're fine. Sarkisian, one of the best play callers in the game. But it wasn't Texas offense that was leading the way last year. It was the defense. They had a much better defense than they had offense. Quinn Ewers has been inconsistent. He's been injured. Again, I'm not trying to throw him under the bus or anything, but all the Heisman hype makes no sense based on what he's actually done on the field. And, oh, by the way, JD, they return the fewest returning receiving production of anybody in the SEC. So you're asking a quarterback that has not lit the world on fire to essentially have all new receivers and new running backs, at least starting running backs. I know the running backs were there, but all the receivers are basically transfers that are playing for Texas this year. I just think week in and week out in the SEC, it's going to be a little bit of a different story than it was in the Big 12, which, they won it like once out of the last 12 years, something crazy like that. So, no, Texas is not going to come into this conference and dominate it day one. For all those do you need any more reasons than that?
No, man. Hey, I got a nice little list here from you. I'm taking. I got it all set. But I love it. I love you bringing the juice, man. Calling your shot. I'm all about it. Like this is what it's about. It'd be boring if we all had the same opinion. I am full transparency. I'm high on Texas. I like Quinn Ewers. If he can stay healthy, we'll see what happens. But I want to backtrack a little bit to what you said about Jimbo Fisher because it jogged my memory. Again, subscribe to SEC Mike on follow him on Twitter, but subscribe to that SEC podcast on YouTube and on the podcast platforms. If for no other reason, my man, if you haven't already been able to tell, one of the most entertaining in the game. I have vivid memories. Sunday morning, we're in here doing our thing, talking about the day that was, and the news breaks Jimbo Fisher out at A&M. And so I kind of go on the Twitter sphere and I'm seeing, okay, how real is this? What are the details? And I come across y'all's live stream, and my man on a Sunday morning is cracking open a cold one and saying, hey, never too early to celebrate some good news. And just having himself, it was probably like, 9:30 a.m., give or take, here in Nashville. And you were like, hey, it's cause for celebration. And my man went to Tennessee, so it would be in your best interest for A&M to actually have kept a head coach that you don't believe in. And so that story, though, in itself, I thought had to be told during this segment. But, I mean, A&M is so interesting because I think a lot of people hear about what they want to accomplish. They hear about the aspirations, and they hear A&M say, hey, can we win the SEC? Can we make the college football playoff? All those things. And they kind of scoff at it based on what they haven't done. And my whole thing with them, Mike, is if you're A&M, you keep being told in college football input equates to output. And I think A&M has had tremendous input, even with their lack of structure in my mind from what Jimbo Fisher was able to accomplish on the football field. They still acquired some really good talent. Like Connor Wegman is still, I think, one of the more talented quarterbacks in that conference. Now, does that translate? We'll see. But you're telling me we got to recruit well, got to get a quarterback, got to put money into this program, and if we do that, we'll win. And they've done those things. So I think it's about time for someone to be able to maximize, and I hope Mike Elko is that guy. But, man, that reaction from you on Jimbo Fisher, man, when he got let go, it was iconic. It was iconic in every sense.
Yeah, I always know a coach is really in trouble, JD, when, for 2-3 years I was bagging on the guy, trolling him, which I thought was deserved based on the potential of his roster and everything and what he didn't do with it. And, the fans, they just say, oh, you hate us, you don't like our culture, yada, yada, yada. The same thing I'm getting from Auburn people and Texas people now, and I basically got from everybody in the conference. But last fall, A&M, all the people that were bagging on me said, this guy's right. And that's when I really know a coach is in trouble, when they start to agree with me. But yeah, I mean, what a joke. And again, when you get all this hundreds of millions of dollars, a position I'll never be in, I don't know what that does to a person's psyche. But I think some people, it shuts them down. I think they stop trying. What they're more worried about is calling out Nick Saban in a press conference. And I mean, again, you just go back and watch A&M the last 2 or 3 years. They essentially were coached well against Alabama because Jimbo hates Saban, and then they lose the next week to Mississippi State. And that's not to be disrespectful to Mississippi State, but you can't go toe-to-toe with Alabama and even beat them on the field and then go lose to Mississippi State, lose to Auburn. Lane Kiffin's in your head. You can't touch him either. I mean, it's just a disaster. At least it has been. Now the talent's still there. Like you said, I'm glad you brought up Connor Wigman. I think he is one quarterback that very few people around the SEC are really talking about when we're talking the best quarterbacks potentially. And keep in mind, he did this in Jimbo's 2014 offense. That was archaic. Now we've got a guy in Colin Klein that runs a 2024 offense. So I'm just fascinated to see what he looks like. I thought he looked like a Heisman contender early last season. If we could keep him healthy, which that's a big if, because sure. A&M's quarterbacks have been getting banged up seemingly. I can't even remember, JD, the last time they had a starting quarterback that I guess it was Kellen Mond in the COVID year that didn't get hurt. Yeah. But every other year that they've had someone get hurt. Getting rid of the offensive line coach, that was another addition by subtraction. Steve Adazio, he's got no place in major college football, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the game itself is going to be incredible. The fact that we get that rivalry back the last week of the regular season, that's, I think, one of what I would call a gift of realignment, because realignment's tugging that tradition and it's changing rivalries. Like realignment in a roundabout way, not roundabout, it directly gave us A&M and Texas back, which is going to be raucous. That game too, I think it's worth just sort of prefacing a little bit, like whatever we think we know about that game, when that ball gets kicked off in Kyle Field, I say this, in rivalry games, period, but especially in this one, like we need to just delete logic from the formula when we try and break that game down, because it just screams something weird happening to me, especially if there's something at stake for A&M to try and, backdoor their way to a 10th win or whatever it ends up being for them. Like there's going to be a lot at stake emotionally and from a pride perspective, but if there's something at stake when it comes to what happens on the field for A&M or Texas to get into the college football playoff, like that's going to be cinematic, Mike.
Yeah, well, speaking of cinematic, I was just thinking, I could see McConaughey running out on the field to block a game-winning field goal or something crazy. I don't know if you read it. You said it was something wild. I don't know if you're going to go that far, but I mean, the emotions are going to be at an all-time high. There's going to be a lot on the line for both programs, but particularly A&M getting to host that game. They hosted the last version. They lost it at last-second field goal. So, man, that right there is the game I have. They could both be 0-11. I still want to watch that game more than anything. But realistically, I think both of them are going to be playing for the right to go to the college football playoff, and I like A&M to win it.
That's going to be fun, man. That's going to be fun. One more thing before we move on here. I guess two more things. I think that in this game, we've seen in big rivalries, specifically Michigan and Ohio State, there is a prerequisite to being the coach at either of those schools that you have to beat your rival consistently, or you can't lose too many in a row, essentially. And we're seeing that now with Ryan Day. He goes 11-1, and he's lost to Michigan now 3 times in a row, and people are like, is he the right guy? When in reality, he's won north of 87% of his games. Do you think we're hurtling towards a situation here with A&M and Texas if they become national powers, and Texas is right now, we'll see if A&M can get there, where that sort of framework can be applied to the head coach? Like, hey, we go 11-1, but we lose to A&M too many times in a row. We're going to have some problems?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a perfect example, JD. I mean, are there any Texas fans that are upset with Sarkisian right now? I think the answer is no. What's his record against Oklahoma, who they claim is their biggest rival?
Sure.
I believe he's got a losing record. I believe he's 1-2 against Oklahoma.
Yep.
So is that defining him? No. But if he loses to A&M and he misses the college football playoff, clearly they're not going to fire him or anything. But there's going to be some tough – if he loses to A&M this year on the road and then he loses to A&M at home the following year, they might be crazy enough to fire him. I'll put it that way.
Golly. Can you imagine? I mean, that Sunday morning, if that ends up happening, will be I'll be bonkers. That'll be absolutely bonkers. Second of the two things to get to here before we move on, I feel like if if Texas takes care of business against A&M and they make the college football playoff and they finish around the top 3 of the SEC, to me that would validate Sark a lot, and I think it would validate last season a lot and all the success they had on the field. In your mind, what would make you a believer in Texas and a believer in Sark for what they could accomplish this upcoming season?
I want to see him beat Georgia. And I know that game's at home, but I think that's critical to see how they handle that. Just, the week in, week out grind in the SEC is just different than the Big 12. And people roll their eyes at it, but it's true. And perfect example, they play teams like Kentucky and Florida and Mississippi State this year. Now, Mississippi State, they should kill. And that's because Mississippi State's in year 1. But if this was a normal Mike Leach or Dan Mullen Mississippi State, that's not a gimme either. But it's those games like Kentucky, like Florida, that could come and get you. Though I see them losing a game like that this year. In addition to A&M, in addition to possibly Oklahoma, I think certainly Georgia they'll lose as well. So you start to see where, again, I'm not saying they're going to be terrible. I think it'll be about 9-3, but they're going to drop a game probably, maybe 2, that people just automatically chalk up to an automatic win. But it doesn't happen in this conference. And the only ones that have avoided that seemingly is Nick Saban. He's the greatest coach of all time, and Kirby Smart, who, as Lane Kiffin says, he's got 25 5-stars over there. He's got no business losing any of these games. Everyone else that's ever coached in this conference loses games like that, and seemingly on an annual basis.
As our friend of the show, Jake Crane, would say, it's not always the big ones, it's the landmines in between on the schedule that make it a little bit complex. You mentioned Georgia. What do you make of Georgia right now, Mike? Because to me, I'm like, I think they're the best roster right now in college football. I think there's probably some names that we don't know about just yet on the defensive side nationally that are going to step up and be dudes. Is Georgia the best team in college football right now? It's probably the best place to start.
I think so, but it's night and day difference from last year with the schedule. I mean, last year was a joke, and it wasn't all their fault. The Oklahoma game got canceled, but their fans had to defend them every week. Every week I said, this is not number 1 team in the country. I don't care that they won 2 in a row. This is not number 1. And in the end, that proved to be true. Now this year, I think the record could be worse, but the team possibly could be better. They have to go to Bama. They have to go to Texas. They have to go to Ole Miss. They get Tennessee late in the year. We both said we think Florida will be better, but I don't realistically think Florida's going to beat them, but you just never know in a rivalry. So I think Georgia could lose a game, maybe even 2. Still would probably be my pick to win the national championship, even if they lost a game or 2, depending on, I would imagine we're talking like 1 or 2 point losses here. But look at last year. I mean, there was one game where Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers were banged up, and they lost it. And obviously those guys are in the NFL now. And they really had taken a step back on defending the run game. And that killed them against Alabama when they finally had to face a team. Even Tennessee opened the gate with a 75-yard rushing touchdown. They completely shut them down the rest of the game. But it just goes to show that they were not quite elite of elite like they had been the 2 years that they won the national championship. They had a bevy of defensive linemen that went on to the NFL. I'm not saying they're devoid of talent, but that was a little bit of an issue. And so I'll be fascinated to see that. How do they defend the run? Do they return to one of the elite in the country? And how do they look without Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, who in the world was going to guard those guys? And particularly when they put them both on the same side of the field, that was just like a cheat code.
And that's the terrifying thing, I think, for college football is Georgia last year, let's say you kind of have a similar path, losing the SEC championship game. They end up being on the outside looking in for the college football playoff, getting a bye, that is. In the 12-team playoff, they would still be in the dance. They'd have a chip on their shoulder, have 2 weeks, give or take, to get healthy, hit the ice bath, scheme somebody up. Like, I think Georgia last year in the 12-team playoff, I'd have a hard time not picking them to win the whole darn thing if we were to run it back in a 12-team format last year. And I think Kirby Smart does such a great job one, manufacturing motivation for his team. Like we have that clip, obviously, of Nolan Smith where he's going to say, y'all say we're going 7-5, this, that, and the other. And it's like, we talked to Chris Marler about this as well. He's like, I don't know who believes that or if anybody did believe that, but that's manufactured. If you lose a game and you kind of feel a little bit of a shock to the senses, a sense of urgency to where, no, you lose another one, you may or may not be able to compete for a national championship. I think Georgia treats losses like an ice bath. Like some folks, they take a loss and it wounds them and they go down to the dumps and they disperse. Like Georgia, it wakes them up and they're like, oh, okay, we're ready to roll right now. And so I think that's it's kind of dangerous for college football, honestly. Carson Beck, I think a lot of people would say he is one of the top, if not the top quarterbacks in college football. Are you as high on him as the rest of the public is?
Yeah, I think you almost have to be. Now, if you throw on the Alabama game, again, his top two playmakers were kind of banged up, but he had some mistakes in that game. And again, is that fair to hold it against him? Because for 12 games prior, he was outstanding. Maybe not. But in those key games, you can't make those mistakes. And I would imagine that was a big part of his decision to come back, was to kind of correct those things in a SEC championship type, playoff type atmosphere, to where he doesn't tighten up a little bit, doesn't make those miscues that really killed his team in that ball game. But yeah, I mean, everything with Georgia, it's like we're kind of like picking at like a tiny little scab that they have here. Kind of, like literally everybody in the country would sub their issues for their own, because when it's someone like Oklahoma, we're like, do they even have an offensive line? These are not the concerns that we have in Athens. It's how elite are they? Are they far and away the best team in the country, or are they just the best team in the country and one or two other teams could possibly beat them? That's kind of the world we're living under Kirby Saban.
I think what you said about Carson Beck.
Kirby Smart, my bad.
Oh, no, you're great. You're great. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I just said Kirby Saban, my bad.
Oh, no, I mean, hey, it's kind of rolling off the tongue. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people. I don't think you're the last person to put those names together, whether it be unintentionally or intentionally. But what you said about Carson Beck in the big stages, man, like the immediate thought I have is J.J. McCarthy in last year's college football playoff and the year before that against TCU. Now, Carson Beck didn't throw 2 pick sixes, so it wasn't quite as optically displeasing the way that he played against Alabama in that high-stakes game. But, I mean, fast forward the tape a year later, J.J. McCarthy very clearly was better positioned to have more success in the college football playoff game, I happen to believe, because he had experience on a stage like that. So Carson Beck, with more experience under the belt, more I don't know if he has the same high-level caliber of weapons, because you mentioned Bowers and McConkey. You don't replace those guys, but they do have ETN. They do have Dom Lovett, his second year in the system. I love Colby Young from Miami, the transfer they got. Today, if I had to pick today, Mike, I'd probably pick Georgia to win the whole darn thing. Now, thankfully, we're not picking today, but that would be the way that I'll lean right now.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think that's the way you have to do it. And it's Georgia's to lose, essentially, kind of like it was last year. But I would always say that I would prefer to have a quarterback, and not that Carson Beck is like totally immobile, but I would prefer to have a quarterback that can run, just and particularly be a game-breaking athlete like a Jaden Daniels. And I know someone that you love, Jalen Milroe. I think most people would take Beck over Milroe, but again, when we get to SEC championship, when we get to the college football playoff, it's that kind of attribute that can you can have the perfect call on defense, and an athlete like that can just destroy it in an instant, in a heartbeat. So that is the one part of Carson Beck's game that I would say I don't think that he's quite capable of. But when you're talking about just pocket awareness, arm strength, accuracy, I don't know that there's anyone better than Carson Beck in the game.
No, I mean, we're in lockstep there. We're in lockstep, and I think the hope, I guess, if you're a Georgia fan, is, hey, we hold it down in those front five enough to where we don't need my man 15 scrambling too much and doing his best Jalen Milroe impersonation. Mike, let's get you out of here with this, man. We appreciate all your time. Oklahoma, they saw Brent Venables go from 6 wins to 10 wins, and they said, hey, let's give him a raise. Let's redo that contract a little bit, tack on 2 more years, and give him a little bit more money. Your overall thoughts on Oklahoma saying, hey, we want to keep Coach Venables around here a little bit longer, even though it's only been 2 years?
Yeah, at first I was shaking my head saying, what in the world are we doing? First of all, who are we betting against here? I mean, who is going to come in and try to steal Venables away from us? That didn't make a ton of sense. How are they going to do in the SEC? I think I kind of would have waited for that. I really think, especially a first-time head coach, you really can't start to figure out how good of a coach he is until his second round of coordinators. Now, I like the hires he made. Seth Luttrell already on staff there, and then Zach Alley, someone that worked under him for Clemson. So I'm not sitting here doubting these hires, but every offseason, everybody loves the hires, right? Mm-hmm. And then what if we get to the fall and all of a sudden we have one of the best offenses in the country last year? What if we're just middle of the road this year? Then all of a sudden, then I'm starting to question Brent Venables. So there's still some concerns, but then once you kind of dive into the numbers, all they really did was give him 2 more years and a measly pay bump. So I'm fine with that. In that regard, I don't think this is – I've seen some people say, well, man, this is Jimbo Fisher 2.0. No. They didn't give him $100 billion guaranteed and all this. And so I'm fine with it. It was kind of eye-opening at first, but I think this is just them saying, we got our guy. This is just the latest example of it. Recruiting's out of this world, and this is just going to further help that. So at the end of the day, I think this was probably a wise move by Oklahoma.
I think when you know, you know. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the pushback on the outside has been just that. It's been from the outside. I don't see a lot of Oklahoma fans saying, man, why do we extend this guy? It's only been 2 years. Like, I think they're pretty happy with the direction. And so, like you said, when you break down the numbers and you say, okay, it really is only a 2-year extension, a little bit of extra cash flow, we can live with that, and we're okay with that, move it into the SEC. Well, Mike, this has been awesome, dude. This has been so great. I'm so glad we got you on the show. I'm so grateful the folks got to be exposed to your way of thinking around the best conference in college football and the way of life that it is. Again, that SEC podcast. Subscribe on all platforms. Podcast, YouTube, wherever you get your content. Mike's got you covered on both those fronts. The social channels, still at SEC Mike on Instagram and on Twitter. Is that accurate?
It's Michael W. Bratton, but if you search SEC Mike, that's my handle, so it'll pop right up.
Let's go. Mike, you're the man. Folks, check out his content. Make sure you subscribe here as well. But from all of us, for Nick Brake running the show, myself, JD Pakel, SEC Mike, bringing the juice. We appreciate y'all. We love y'all. Going to keep this party rolling, and we will see y'all next time.